IU fans, you know what? I'm starting to get that. I'm starting to get that feeling. We're getting through the summer. You know, basketball draft, the NBA finals. They're in the rearview mirror, and in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Once you get to this time of year, you start feeling the game of football course through your veins. And that's
Hmm.
kind of what I'm thinking. Your Hoosiers had a memorable 2024 season, 11 and 1, college football playoff appearance. Only two losses of the season were to the two teams playing each other in the national championship game. And no one wants to see this team sustain their success. Everyone's saying it's a flash in the pan, a 1 year wonder. Indiana may not even be ranked in the preseason top 25. Imagine how ridiculous that would be. Matt and I are going to dive into some of the new names and the new faces on this offense, dig into your QB1 a little bit. What are we fired up about? What makes us a little bit nervous? And so much more here on episode 347 of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Friday, June 27th, 2025. I'm your host, Nathan Krishnan. Here with me is my normal co host, Matt Lukens. Matt, Indiana, they're not going to keep things going. That year was magical. It was miraculous. How could Indiana keep this going? We just saw this a few years ago. The 2020 team was so great, only for everything to crumble and implode soon thereafter. With that said, Matt, there have been a lot of moves. This offense is going to have a lot of the same system, a lot of the same fundamentals, but a lot of new names, a lot of new faces. Just overarching big picture, the way you see this offense shaping up in 2025, how excited are you that they're going to light up the scoreboard and put up points in a similar fashion to the way they did last year?
I would just like to take a victory lap and remind everybody that last year at this time, when everybody was talking about IU football, I was one of the very few people online talking about how this team had the chance to go and make the playoffs given the schedule. That's all I would like to say. And so I am again here sitting
Hell
looking at the
yeah.
schedule saying that this team has very little chance of making the playoff this year. And I know that's gonna
Ah.
make a lot of people very upset, but I just don't see it given the schedule. But the overarching thought is I think this team will be better than last year's team
Ooh.
on the field. But this team will not make the playoffs because they have a harder schedule this year. And that is why they are going to be a much better team. They're going to go to a New York Six Bowl and they're going to kick somebody's butt and we're going to get that bowl streak, losing streak off of our back. But right now, gut thought, it's almost July. What am I thinking about this team in August and September and on so forth? I just think the schedule is going to be too hard. They have the two hardest games in the entire league this year.
At
They
Oregon
have the two
and at
hardest
Penn
games.
State.
They have at Oregon, at Penn State, at Oregon after a bye, at Penn State, probably a night game.
Fun.
It's just the two hardest games you could possibly play next year. It's just two losses almost immediately. Would I love for them to prove me wrong? Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great. I think the other hard game, by the way, we have two other ones. Like at Iowa is hard, and I
Sure.
think
Home Illinois.
Illinois at home. I think if you can go 2-2 in those games, I think you have a chance of making the college football playoff.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it depends on how you split them. Because if you beat Illinois, and let's say Illinois has a bad season, and then you beat Iowa, and Iowa's kind of mid, and then you lose the two big games again this year that you didn't really play. I don't think they're going to be selected this year, given of how they performed last year in the Notre Dame game. Whether you believe that's fair or not, and irregardless, that's going to go into that thought process is going to go into the selection of the team this year. Now, if the team does go and win at Oregon, lose at Penn State, beat Illinois
Right.
at home, and then lose to Iowa at
Sure.
Kinnick, I think they get in, right? But they got to take a scalp this year of one of
Yeah.
the two big teams on their schedule. They really do. They got to beat Oregon. They got to beat Penn State if you have any shot at making the college football playoff. Now, if they can beat either of those teams, the ceiling of this team is much higher than last year's. I
I
think
see
the
that.
defense overall is better. I think the offense, we'll talk about in a second, the offense, especially the starters, almost all across the board are better than what they were last year. Almost the entire offense. Now, you do lose your offensive coordinator, right? Or you lose your QB coach, sorry,
Yeah. It's
to
sincerity. Yeah.
and you lose Sinceri to UCLA. You do lose basically all, I mean, and we lost Tyler Morris and all of our
Yeah.
slot wide receivers from last
Yeah.
year. So they're replacing a ton on this roster, but I really, really, really think that the ceiling of this team is much, much higher than last year's, and the floor is higher. I just think the schedule is
It is
just
what it is, right?
not very fair. It's not very fair this year, but
Yeah.
that's fine. Some years you get last year's schedule, which is fantastic, and some years you're gonna get this year's schedule, which is like, all right, let's see what they can do, right?
Exactly. And, it's funny because this is the one year in a long time where Indiana has not faced Ohio State or Michigan.
And
And
they have
you're
a harder
like,
schedule than they normally have. Yes, I know. It's insane to me. Yeah.
and you're sitting here like, oh, hey, look, could Indiana run the table? And, what is the upside here? Well, like you said, in order, it goes home Illinois. So, I would think that's the easiest of those four tough games that you said, and you get it at home. So hopefully you're able to
Mm,
knock that one out, get the win in week 4, and sort of get this snowball going in the right direction.
right.
And then right after facing Illinois at home, you head to Kinnick. So that's the second tough game in the schedule. And then right after you go to Kinnick, you do have a bye week. Oregon also has a bye week, but then you play the Ducks in Eugene the following week. So it's 3 straight games. It's Illinois, at
Three
Iowa,
straight
at
games.
Oregon. There is a bye in between the two road games, but Oregon also has a bye before facing Indiana.
You have to go 2-3 in that stretch. You
Two and
have to.
one. Yeah, 2-1, 2 out of 3.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
two. You have to win 2 out of 3. Yes, sorry, yes, yes,
And
yes,
then
yes.
there is a
Two and
reprieve.
three and five.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reprieve schedule wise before the road game in Penn State in November, which, if the two teams are competing for a CFP spot, Penn State will feel a lot better about having that game at home.
Mm.
It's just, it makes such a big difference before IU ends the season home, Wisconsin at Purdue. Let's talk about the quarterback, Matt. The new sheriff in town. Fernando Mendoza, 6'5", 225, 2 years
He's
of
skinny.
eligibility. A little skinny, 2 years of eligibility, good arm, experience from the University of California, Berkeley, where it was originally the Pac-12, then it became the ACC. His game by game last year was all over the map, but you could definitely see why someone with the offensive coaching reputation of Curt Cignetti and Mike Shanahan wanted to pursue Mendoza and make him the guy. Big time
Mm.
games against Stanford, big time games against Florida State. With that said,
Yep.
though, there was a game against Miami in October where Mendoza's Cal team and Jonathan Brady's Cal team, also a current Hoosier, took a big lead against the Ducks, the Cam Ward led Ducks, on a late Saturday night game on ESPN. And
Yep.
then they allowed a pretty historic comeback to Miami, and the Ducks came back and won in Cal's house. True road game for
It
Miami in
was
the conference.
it was rough. Yeah.
And it kind of sullied the rest of the season for the University of California. They didn't really get that spark back. With that said, Mendoza did finish the season strong. Great game at Wake in a game that Cal won. Again, we talked about the
Yeah.
home Stanford performance in the rivalry matchup. Um, Mendoza has a skill set that I think is pretty different to Kurtis Rourke's. I know they're both going to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
QB1. I know they're both going to be QB1, but one of the things that really stood out with Curt Cignetti the day he was hired, and we talked about it on this podcast, is that he's gotten his positive winning success a lot of different ways.
Mm.
He did it with, as an assistant with Saban at Alabama. He did it in the D2 and FCS levels before a year or two in FBS with James Madison. He did it with different quarterbacks. If you see his last quarterback at JMU, Jordan McLeod, he's very different than Kurtis Rourke. And McLeod is very different than the previous JMU quarterback, Todd Centeio. There is a wide range of players and skill sets that Cignetti has worked with to become the winner that he is today. And I think you're
Yep.
going to see a lot of that with Fernando Mendoza this upcoming season. You actually said it immediately. You were like 6'2", 225. He doesn't look very big. He doesn't look very thick. He doesn't look like Nate Sudfeld did when he was slinging it at Indiana back
Yeah.
in the early 2010s. Mendoza is going to be more mobile than Kurtis Rourke. I think the QB run game is going to be a little bit more featured at Indiana than it was in the previous season, especially when you consider that unlike Kurtis Rourke, as the story came out after the season, Mendoza's got two good knees, which I think will go a long way in helping Indiana use the QB
Yep.
in their run game a little bit. Um, with that said, like Mendoza did have a 75 PFF grade as far as the quarterback position is concerned last year. A lot of turnover worthy plays, a lot of pressures in his face from opposing defenders, a lot of sacks taken. There are sparkling performances. There are rough games like the one he had. I think it was against, a little bit against Miami, but also kind of a rough game against UC Davis in the season opener. A little bit of a rough game against Syracuse in a home loss. Summarize Fernando Mendoza, Matt, for the folks listening. What excites you about Mendoza? What gives you a little bit of concern? And is he a quarterback that can help sustain the success that Indiana had from last season, even if it doesn't mean a CFP appearance?
Oh, he for sure can help us sustain success. Now is he Kurtis Rourke and a gunslinger and out there hitting NFL caliber throws every single Saturday afternoon? No, but yes, but no. Like
We'll see.
he's got a really, really good arm. He's just not Rourke. And like we were treated, we were hampered, we were
Yeah.
spoiled. That's the word I'm looking for. We were spoiled last year with what Rourke brought to the table for the team.
On and off the
Um,
field, right? I mean, the
on and
leadership,
off the field. Playing through a torn ACL all year long, leading this team, playing through injury, playing through a broken thumb,
well, I was
putting
going to
it
say the
all on
hand
the
too. Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
The hand, like he did everything for this team. Like, and that guy at the end of the day, I hope gets a little something something in Memorial Stadium for what he did.
Ooh, I like that. I like that for
I
sure.
think I know he was there for 1 year. I know that's reserved for very special players, but to be the leader, and I think he was a captain, right? Being the leader of that team, being banged up as he was, putting it all on the line for the university for a program that really hasn't done anything in its history at all.
Exactly.
Um, I mean, it means the world to me. It means the world to everybody else, I'm sure,
Yeah.
listening to this podcast.
Me too. Yeah.
Um, and so I don't think Mendoza's that guy. What I do think Mendoza is Mendoza's a much better fit in the system, is what he is. The way that Cignetti likes his quarterbacks to play is for the quarterback to be able to move. Well, last year we had a quarterback that for all year had a torn ACL, allegedly, and then for the other half of the year had a broken thumb. right? And so you had a guy back there that was really immobile, and he did fantastically with what he had and what he could do and what he could work with.
Yeah.
But this is a dude in Mendoza that can do everything the coaching staff wants him to do and more,
Yeah,
right?
think about the
And
rollouts
so this
outside the pocket. You think about, hey, occasional cube designed QB run. You think about, hey, let's scramble if the receivers can't gain separation. You don't have to force throws into tight windows, having Mendoza
how
as your
many
quarterback.
how many times last year did we watch Rourke actually run on an RPO?
Like
This
10
is this isn't
the whole season. Like I think
yeah,
you can
the
actually
whole
give a number.
season.
Like I think it maybe 10,
Yeah,
8 to 12.
10, 10. I think it might be 10 to 15. I think we might be misunderestimating him. But
The wheels.
only in some of the biggest games would he do this, right? I think you could see Mendoza do, escape out of the pocket maybe like 5 to 6 times a game, right?
Exactly.
Where instead of maybe once or twice a game, right? And so this is going to prolong drives. And again, that's a team. This is we're a team that likes to score fast, but also can do the three play first down, slow and methodical, run the ball. On third down, he doesn't see anything downfield. He's not going to try to force something when he can just run with the ball. That's not something that Rourke could ever do last year.
Yeah.
And he would have done it if he could, but he really couldn't given what his injury was. And so I think Mendoza is going to help this offense stay on the field a lot longer, which in turn, obviously, because you guys know a lot about football, I don't need to explain this to you, but will help the defense out a bit by and keeping them more fresh and keeping them sitting on the bench and getting cool and getting more water. As the other side of the ball kind
Gosh.
of takes care of business. And you add in the obviously, we'll talk about in a second, the two running backs you've added in the portal to a quarterback that can now run to an offensive line that is, basically position by position upgraded after
So good.
this year.
So good.
Like this team is going to be able to control games much more than they were able to last year, which is crazy given the fact that we scored the second most points in all of college football last year. So,
Yeah. Especially from a points per game standpoint. Truly a special season offensively. And then it's like, okay, what can Indiana roll over from last year to keep this train going in the right direction? Mendoza had 52 like rushes last season. And I know like I'm not including sacks in this because I know in college football sacks are, removed from a quarterback's rushing stats. I'm just talking about straight runs, whether
yeah.
it's a designed run or a scramble. Last season, Mendoza had 52 of those that accumulated 334 yards just on the ground. That's like a third or fourth running back option. Indiana has three solid running backs in the backfield this upcoming season, solid and then some. But you add this extra wrinkle, and I think that's what Mendoza is going to do this year that Kurtis Rourke didn't. I'm not saying Mendoza is the skilled passer that Rourke is because he's not, but when it comes
He's
to,
good, but he's
for
he's
sure,
not at the level of Rourke. Yeah.
precision and as surgeon like as you move down the field, whether it's short, medium, or deep, Kurtis Rourke was as skilled of a college passer as it gets. And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if Kurtis Rourke exceeds expectations in the NFL. I know he's a
That
seventh
would be the
round
least
pick.
surprising thing.
I know
Yeah.
he's a seventh round pick, but again, the 49ers have done it with the seventh rounder before. Purdy's going to be the QB in San Francisco, but I could see Rourke step up, show a lot in the preseason, and then there's a team out there that says, "Whoa, actually, we didn't realize how good he was. Wow, like actually, you know what? Maybe we need to trade a little bit something for Curtis Rourke and have him on our Sunday game day roster." But Mendoza's going to add a curveball, a changeup, and a sweeper
Yeah.
to Curt Cignetti's offensive portfolio, to
It does.
his choice, and that includes Mike Shanahan as well. As the coordinator. Like last year, it was kind of clear early in games. Indiana's offense was going to blow the opponent out of the water. There weren't there wasn't really a chess match, a back and forth aspect to Indiana's offense for most of the season. Against Notre Dame, you saw the reverse, correct? Where the Irish
Yep.
defense pretty clearly was like, we figured this out. We figured this
Mm,
out. We know what this Indiana offense can do. We know what their strengths are. We know what their limitations are. We're going to maybe overwhelm the offensive line. Maybe Kurtis Rourke was a little bit off. Maybe the home crowd was unbelievable in South Bend that night. And at the end of the day, it was like you couldn't you couldn't throw a changeup against Notre Dame. And by the way, once it turned after the first 10 minutes against Ohio State, that's what happened as well. Once the Buckeye defense figured it out, Caleb Downs and JT Tuimoloau and the rest of that defense, like
mm,
once they solved Indiana's offense, that kind of told the whole story.
yeah.
College football, especially at the top of the game, there's a lot of push and shove. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of, hey, the offense has a script for the first quarter, and then the defense makes an adjustment, and then the offense says, "Oh, let's do something different." And then you've got the 2-minute drill, then you got halftime, and then you have 4 or 5 new things that take place in the second half. At the top of the game, that's what you see more often than not.
Mm,
Indiana didn't have that because, let's face it, in 10 out of the 12 games last year, including the bucket game, it was pretty clear from the jump that Indiana was going to, you know, smack the opposing team like a piñata at an 8-year old's birthday party. Like
yeah.
it was explosive. It was fireworks. And even the Washington game, right? I know it was a little closer than we'd like. Even the Michigan game, I know it was a little bit closer than we'd like. But I felt like Indiana had enough answers to get across the finish line in those games too. I didn't feel like there were too many chess match type adjustments back and forth. So I think that's what Mendoza is going to give Curt Cignetti this year. There's a little bit less consistency. There's a little bit less precision for sure. But there's an
No.
X factor variability element that may lead to Indiana winning a game unexpectedly on the schedule and also maybe dropping a game unexpectedly on the schedule. And it's one of
Yeah.
those things where it's like, well, I don't know exactly how this is going to go. So I'm excited to see what Fernando Mendoza can bring to the table. He looked fine during the spring game. Let's move on to, talking about this backfield, Matt, because that is one of the things I think Indiana will be able to rely on the most this upcoming year. Kalon Black is back as Indiana's, I think, more of the short yardage goal line guy. Make sure, hey, if Indiana needs a couple yards, he's able to get there. But the two incoming transfers are the ones that I think a lot of people are excited about. Roman Hemby from Maryland, Lee Beebe out of UAB. They're going to give you a lot in the running game, Matt, but I think they're going to give you a hell of a lot in the passing game, too. Not
Yep.
quite sure what Indiana is going to do as far as the slot receiver. Of course, Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper are going to be major factors on the boundary. But what Indiana does, whether it's the slot, the tight end, the running back in the passing game, is going to be a fascinating development over the course of September, this upcoming season. Talk to me about what fires you up about Lee Beebe, Roman Hemby. We saw Hemby have a great game against Indiana with Maryland last season, and when he announced he was coming to IU, I was pumped.
Yeah, I mean, Hemby is a explosive home run hitting back, and you mentioned it. We saw it when we played Maryland. That guy gave us fits, right? And when he's on, and he's got a hole the size of Montana to run through. I mean, that guy is hard to stop in the second level, and then he's gone, right? Like he's got that speed in open space that just electrifies teams, right?
And that
Trust
could be
me,
really important next year, right? Like last year, it felt like, hey, if Tyson Lawton broke through, it wasn't an 80-yard touchdown. It was maybe a 25, 30-yard game.
Yeah. And the same thing with
Even
not Jordan
Ellison,
Howard.
Justice
With
Ellison was
Ellison,
there last
Justin
year.
Ellison, same thing. Just Ellison, same thing. I didn't see Justin Ellison having that level of, you know, space making speed. Like he was a guy, he broke a couple really big runs, but it was just because teams were overplaying to one side or the other, or the offensive line and Zach Horton did a fantastic job of blocking. He had a big hole to run through and had a
No
lot of
kidding.
space in front of him.
Yeah.
But but no, I mean, what I was gonna say this about Mendoza, but I'll say this about the running backs as well. Last year's offense was fantastic. It was great, but it was very two-dimensional. It was we're running it down your throat or we're throwing it over your heads. This year's offense is 3D, maybe even
There
4D,
there's more
right?
in there, exactly.
There's more. You got running backs in Beebe and Hemby that can catch the ball out of the outfield. They're going to be elite in screens. All right, great. You got a quarterback that can run. Okay, awesome. On the RPO plays, you have more things for the defense to actually genuinely think about, right? Your wide receivers are another year older. That's fantastic. I don't know what you're doing with your slot receiver, and I think that terrifies a lot of other teams. And I think the tight end room, I think Zach Horton was fantastic, by the way. I'm not saying Zach Horton isn't a great player, but I think the tight end room in general has been upgraded. Those guys can all do a bunch of different things, right? And so going into this year, like I've said before, and the offensive line is better. So every position on the offense, in my opinion, other than QB, has been upgraded, or it's guys that have stayed over from last year that were fantastic in Surratt and Cooper. So I I I I think you're right. Hemby has breakout speed. Beebe's a guy that can do it all out of the backfield. He's like a utility knife. Like, he reminds me a lot of, because I'm an Eagles fan, so
Ooh.
he reminds me a ton of Darren Sproles, where
Ooh, I like that.
he's a guy that you can just hand the ball off to, and you know he's gonna get you like a 5 yard gain. Or like any between a 3 or a 5 yard gain. You know he's gonna do it. He's gonna fall forward. He's not a gigantic guy. He's not physically imposing, but he's just crafty. And then on top of it, he's a very good receiving back. So that's pretty good. And then we have Caleb Black coming back from last year, who at times last year, especially late in games when he was playing more over Tyson Lawn and Ellison,
Yep.
really showcased that he has a ton of talent. He's green. Right? He hasn't really played a ton. Um, but you have a back with tons of promise. You have a back that has played Big Ten football before in Hemby, who's done fantastically well, albeit he has been a little bit inconsistent, and I believe he had problems with fumbles last year, if I remember correctly. And then you have Beebe, who's a guy, coming up a level, right?
Right.
He's playing at a smaller school, but is a dude that on paper looks like he can give this offense a more three-dimensional look out of the running back room. So I like they cover all these different bases with the pickups in the running back room, and overall I feel like it's a deeper and more stable room going into next year.
Yeah, I think that's the unique factor about this team, right? Like so many folks last year at this point were talking about how Curt Cignetti is bringing over guys from JMU. And look,
Hmm.
especially on the defense, we're going to have some JMU guys that are going to be the core of what this defense does, right? Mikhail Kamara,
Yes.
Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, like they are arguably the three best players on this team. Um, on the offensive side, especially, what has caught my attention is that Curt Cignetti, yes, he did lose some of his JMU players. He's filled them in with Power Five incoming transfers in the portal. I know you talked about Beebe out of UAB, but Roman Hemby, he's coming in from Maryland. Fernando Mendoza, he's coming in from Cal.
How, right?
Jonathan Brady, his teammate, also at Cal. Pat Coogan, the center, coming over from Notre Dame.
Notre Dame.
Zen Mahalski was a part-time starter on the offensive line at Ohio State. Holden Stace, I believe, was at Miami last year.
Hmm.
I know that doesn't always translate to success. But before you're willing to write off this Indiana team as a fringe, 7-5, 8-8, or 8-4, or oh, they're gonna go under their win total this upcoming year. You don't have to bet on Indiana. I wouldn't bet against Indiana. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
I understand if you don't want to buy into the playoff. I understand if you don't want to buy into the hype, the Big Ten title. Oh, they're gonna do all these great things this year. Fine, but I wouldn't bet against them because as we've talked about now, with this skill set on offense, they can do different things than what they did last year. They have 5 or 6 or 7 tricks up their sleeve. There were 29 running backs in all of FBS, Matt, last year that had 30 receptions. There were 29, okay?
Yep.
130 odd FBS teams. 29 running backs had 30 receptions or more. And Lee Beebe is one of them. Roman Hemby is another. So I understand Tyson Lawton is the very fact. I understand Justice Ellison did a lot of good things. But you're bringing in a couple of guys. That are going to add a whole new element. And what I like about Indiana's schedule, I know you talked about some things you don't like. What I do like is that Indiana's going to have 3 games to get things right early on.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to figure some things out. Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, figure some things out. What works, what doesn't work. You still end up winning those games by an average of 30. And then it's Illinois at home week 4. Like I like how that part of the schedule sets up compared to what happened in 2021, where after a great season, your first game was a brutal road environment in Kinnick, and it really derailed things from the start in that 2021 season. So I'm very excited about what this backfield is going
Yeah.
to offer. You talk about some of the other running backs in college football last year that had 30 or more catches. How about Woody Marks, who's in the NFL now out of USC?
Hmm.
Cam Scadaboo, who's in the NFL now out of Arizona State. Texas, a team that was in the CFP, won a CFP game, also had 2 running backs last year with 30 catches, and Trey Wisner as well as Jaden Blue. Jaden Blue now might be a starter for the Cowboys by midseason. It wouldn't surprise me. Nick Singleton, how much hype does he get every season? He also is in that list of running backs that had 30 or more receptions last year. Omarion Hampton, who was one of the most coveted running backs in last year's NFL draft, he also reached that level as far as the 30 catch platform is concerned as it relates to running backs in the FBS level. So think about how frequent you saw a running back screen last year at IU. It didn't happen all that much. Think about how much you saw a halfback draw on 3rd and long. You didn't really see it that much. Even on 1st and 10, you didn't see it that much, right? Like it wasn't really a part of the offense last season. A toss play, a sweep play to get guys out on the perimeter. How often were the running backs just a security blanket or release valve in case there was pressure in Kurtis Rourke's face? Not at all. Like a lot of those plays ended up going to Keyshawn Williams or Miles Price, or Kurtis Rourke ended up throwing the ball away or taking a sack. This is what I really like about Curt Cignetti. He builds to a plan. There's no question that Fernando Mendoza's biggest weakness to me right now is what happens when there's pressure in his face. There is a little bit of a chaos panic mode that he goes into. That, at least through 2 seasons at Cal, that's what happened. Curt Cignetti said, well, I'm not going to throw you under the bus, brother. I'm going to give you an offensive line. I'm going to give you a couple running backs that can catch the football. I'm going to give you a couple wide receivers that can act as deep threats when everything does stay on schedule, when everything does stay on time. And then there are a couple of other deep home run threats that are in this depth chart as well. So that's what makes Curt Cignetti special, in addition to everything else. The offense is built with the plan. And Cignetti, as much as anyone, understands the strengths and weaknesses of his quarterback and builds around it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that develop, especially over the course of September before that week 4 game against Illinois. We're going to dive into this offensive line, the tight ends, the wide receivers here coming up. But first, it's time for Who Won the Week this past week in IU Sports. And how about a tip of the cap to softball player Brianna Copeland, as well as swimmer Jason Yep, who won the Big Ten Medal of Honor just this past week. It's an award that was established a long time ago, and it's been in existence for over 100 years. It's the conference's most prestigious award because they give it out for student athletes that combine the academics with the athletics at the highest level in this conference. And, Copeland, who was such a special 4-year softball player at Indiana throughout her career, both on the mound and at the plate, as well as Jason Yep, who um, stunned in the NCAA championship, especially in the 200-yard breaststroke event. The athletic accomplishments speak for themselves for both Copeland and Yep, but the academics as well for both of them, just off the charts, through the roof. Both Copeland and Yep, the Big Ten Medal of Honor recipients. So incredible to see for both of them. They unquestionably won the week this past week in IU sports. But folks, this is a quick reminder. If you enjoy our show, leave us a review. Head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. That stuff matters. It helps us really pop up on your algorithms, pop up on your search queries. Leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. That kind of support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. Remember, on social media, you can find us at the Hoosier Sound or at Indiana HQ. Let's talk about the wide receiving core here, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Fantasy football over everything. We'll get to our trenches soon enough. But Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper return. And I am so excited to see both of them in an IU uniform once again. I can't believe we're at this point, but I think the two most underrated receivers in the league play for Indiana.
And
I mean,
to you, they are
like
Surratt and Cooper, right?
100%. And we're sitting here talking about Surratt and Cooper as if, they're potential breakout players in 2025 in college football. Like, Elijah Surratt should be talked about on the level of, one of the best NFL draft prospects at wide receiver. And I'm talking about one. I'm not talking about top 8 or top 10. Okay? And if Jeremiah Smith was eligible, he'd be on his own tier, but he's not. So Elijah Surratt, to me, should be talked about as a premier NFL draft prospect at the wide receiver position this upcoming season, especially when you think about how Ted McMillan this past year was a top 10 draft pick. And in that conversation, as far as a top receiver available in this class, Elijah Surratt, to me, matches a lot of that skill set. And then there's Omar Cooper. And if you care about college players staying with the school that recruited them in high school, instead of quickly turning their back for greener grass and cleaner waters and immediately jumping to the next transfer portal opportunity, if you really care about wide receivers who not only stay with the school that recruited them in high school, but wide receivers that continue to show steady improvement, then Omar Cooper is your guy. Omar Cooper Jr. is your guy. You should be going to Omar Cooper's NIL merch and buying everything that's listed on there. Because all this guy does is play for the name on the front of the jersey, and all this guy does is continue showing steady improvement. There are other questions after Surratt and Cooper, Matt, that we'll dive into, but just starting with these two guys, how exciting is it to see those two back in an Indiana uniform? Last year, Surratt, 957 yards, 8 touchdowns. Last year, Omar Cooper, 600 yards, 7 touchdowns, 21 yards per reception. I am so pumped to see Surratt and Cooper back in the cream and crimson this upcoming season.
I was worried going into last year whether Rourke and these guys would get a connection with one another. And boy, was I so not worried about anything. I mean, just elite wide receivers. And we've seen Indiana's had really good wide receivers in the past. Nick
Especially out
Westbrook comes
wide.
to mind.
Especially
Yeah,
out
out
wide.
wide.
Like Cody Latimer
Nick
was
Westbrook,
awesome.
Cody Latimer, Mitchell Page, which is
Mitchell
he's not out wide,
Page,
but like bunch of
Shannon
really good
Doss,
and Doss, a
James
lot of
James
really good receivers have come
Hardy,
through. Surratt and Cooper might be the best pair of receivers that I've seen
Simi
at
Cobbs.
IU. Simi Cobb's great. I like Simi Cobbs. Don't talk about Simi Cobbs like that. Simi Cobbs was my
I
goat.
liked him. I liked him too. I'm just thinking about the lineage of great outside wide receivers in Indiana had. James
Okay, good. All
Hardy,
right.
Simi Cobbs,
James
yeah.
Hardy, Simi Cobbs. All these guys were great. These two are a duo that IU throughout its history really just hasn't had, right? They just really, really haven't. I mean, Omar Cooper is only going to get better.
Ugh, heck yeah.
Surratt is already amongst the Big Ten's best. And then it's not even counting in the rest of the guys on this roster. Like this receiving room is a treasure trove of players for Mendoza to throw to. And so again, I expect a lot more back shoulder throws from Mendoza to these guys and a lot more touchdowns from Aura Cooper this year.
So good. So good. The back shoulder special. Indiana really Indiana was really able to make the most out of that type of throw last year. Um, the improvement that Cooper has shown is just so awesome. I mean, talk about somebody who didn't play at all really his true freshman season when true freshmen were getting thrown out on the field, baptism by fire, left, right, and center. Um,
Yeah.
and then he just kept getting better, 250 yards his redshirt freshman season, and then we talked about last year the 600 with the 7 touchdowns. Just consistent improvement week after week, month after month, season after season out of Omar Cooper. He has the potential to be really, really, really special this upcoming year. Have that connection with Fernando Mendoza. But with that said, Matt, like there are a couple of guys behind Surratt and Cooper that have my attention a little bit.
Hmm.
We've talked about EJ Williams before, returning Hoosier. Looked like he was going to hit portal waters, but actually he said, "You know what? I don't mind coming back to Indiana and figuring it out with the offense that I've learned and sort of downloaded through a season already." Then you got Mekhi Jackson, who comes over really as a deep ball threat from Appalachian State. Jackson was a teammate of Elijah Surratt at St. Francis, PA back in
My mom's
2022.
my mom's alma mater,
How about
right?
that? In 2022, and by the way, Mekhi Jackson actually outproduced Surratt in what was the true freshman season for both of them. I'm sure they're not talking about that too much behind the scenes. Well, wide receivers don't trash talk at
They
all.
would wide receivers would never laud over other wide receivers about numbers. That just would never.
Never.
It's not possible.
Then you got Jonathan Brady, who has a an established relationship with Fernando Mendoza from Cal,
Yep.
but
Yep.
curiously, Brady actually was a slot specialist at New Mexico State before making a year to move to Cal for a year and now wearing the cream and crimson. And then, by the way, you got speedster Charlie Becker, who's a true Indiana guy, high school recruit, had his true freshman year last year, and, you know, may emerge on this depth chart. As you look at some of the depth options at wide receiver, Matt, who's the one or two guys that really stand out to you? And, do you think any of them could be relied upon in the slot now that Indiana doesn't have Miles Price or Keyshawn Williams?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, we're supposed to have a slot receiver. Like we went out and got the guy from Michigan whose name is
Tyler
leaving my
Morris.
mind. Tyler Morris. We got Tyler Morris from Michigan, who I was super
Yeah.
excited about because having hung out with Ant a bunch and all of Ant's followers, they're all Michigan
Yes.
people. I've watched Michigan football for like the last 3 years pretty closely,
I mean,
just because I want to
they've
hang
been the
out.
premier
They've
program
been
in
the
the
premier
sport,
program,
like
yeah,
for the
yeah, for
last
pretty
what,
much.
2 to 3 years.
Yep. Yep. And so, I've watched a ton of their games, and Tyler Morris has played in a bunch of them. He had a huge game in the Rose Bowl when they went on to win the national championship. He had a couple of really important plays in that Rose Bowl game that allowed Michigan to even make it to the national championship. So that
Yeah.
sucks leaving him, but losing him. But the fact that Jonathan Brady and Mekhi Jackson both have slot experience, to me, completely relieves my worries. Now, that being said, if we hadn't gone out and gotten Brady
Sure.
in the spring portal, I might have been a little bit more
Yeah.
insecure about this wide receiver room.
Me too.
But now you have competition, and competition breeds excellence. And so you have two guys that are for sure competing for one spot to start and get more touches of the ball and more plays than the other.
Right.
So they're going to work that out in practice. And I trust the coaching staff's ability to decipher which one is better than the other one. And so I have zero worries about this starting group of wide receivers and even the backups. You talked about Charlie Becker's prospect that people have been talking about for a couple of years now as a guy that could really break out. I think that's just bound to happen this year if there's, God forbid, an opening at one of the receiver spots. EJ Williams is somebody we've seen come in and do excellent things on the
Yeah.
field in the small amount of time that he has played. He's
Right.
made some big plays. And so he's a guy that I think can come in and rescue situations
Yeah.
from every now and then and make a good play when the defense might not be expecting him to, because again, he doesn't have a ton of tape in an IU uniform.
Yep.
So I really like depth of this wide receiver room. I like the versatility. I like that you have guys that are gadget guys. There's different things that they do. Surratt is a different receiver from Cooper. Cooper is a different
Yeah.
receiver from Brady. Brady's a different receiver from Jackson.
Yep. Mekhi Jackson.
Jackson's
Yeah.
a different receiver from Williams and Becker. Blah blah blah. Goes on, goes on. They're
Yep.
all different. They're all so different, but they also offer similar things in certain ways. For example, like I said, Brady and Jackson both have slot experience, but Jackson is much more of a home run guy, where Brady is a more solid target and a more consistent target. Surratt isn't going to get you a home run play, but he can get you a nice 20 to 30-yard gain, and be a reliable third down catch, pass
Yep.
catcher. And you have Omar Cooper, who can hit a home run. We've seen him hit a
Yes.
bunch of them in a
21
uniform.
yards per catch last year. Are you kidding me?
21 yards per catch, right? As a guy that can go long, but also a guy who can be a reliable pass catcher in short down situations as well. He can do both, but he's very much more well known for his long, big game busting plays.
Yeah.
And so I like how all of these receivers kind of work their way around being able to fit multiple different style
Yeah.
of routes, multiple different styles of offense. We know that Surratt and Cooper are willing blockers as well.
Yes, for
And so
sure.
again, that is something else I want to see out of Brady and Jackson. Are they willing to do the dirty work? Because I'm
Yep.
going to assume the one that kind of separates himself
Yeah,
because they're both great players, but the one that the reason they're going to separate themselves is the one that's willing to do the dirty work and willing
exactly.
to do the grunt work is the one that Cignetti's going to put out there because again, this offense is going to be running the ball first.
Focus.
No matter the focus is that RPO, that running, the threat of running the ball is the most important part of all this entire offense, which is why I've said before, the fact that we didn't have a quarterback that was able to run and still did as well as we did is insane to me.
Yes.
But but yeah, I really look forward to seeing what this wide receiver core can do, given the weapons that surround them on the in the QB spot, in the running back room, and now in the offensive line in the tight end room. It's a much more well-rounded offense this year than it was last year. And last year we had the second most points per game in college football.
That's a hilarious sentence. Right at the end there. Indiana had the second most points per game in college football. Man, so good.
I love it.
So
I
good.
love it. It's great.
Um, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. The last 10 minutes has kind of fired me up for this wide receiving core. Like,
Good.
I'm pretty pumped because you're right. Like, the theme of this offense this upcoming season is going to be keeping defenses off balance. It's going to be
But it's
options.
keeping it's that's what I was gonna say. It's multiple dimensionality. That's what it is.
Multiple dimensionality. You have freedom. You have options. You have not the option. I don't think that's going to be an option.
I
But
think
you
Surratt is the option. You
I
have
meant
you mean
like
like
I mean the
you
option.
meant you meant the
The
option. I mean,
I don't want the option, but I like options. And
hey man, it
I
works
think
for Army, it could work for IU.
no, it
Remember
won't.
we
Don't.
do you remember we had this discussion?
No.
We had this discussion on this very podcast probably two
Man,
years ago.
that sounds right. Yeah.
A summer discussion we had on this podcast. If somebody could go find it,
Ooh,
that'd be awesome. But we were talking about what we would do after Tom Allen. And I think one of us
ooh.
proposed the question, would you accept a coach that ran the option? Because we were talking about how in order
Dexter
to win the big
Williams,
we were talking
Antoine
about how
Randall.
there exactly. We were talking about how in order to for IU to compete in the Big Ten, we can't compete like the big boys do.
Yeah.
That we had to take an angle at competing at them.
Right.
We had to do something funky. Like
Out of left
there's
field.
no way something out of left field and going and getting a 60-year-old head coach with barely any Power Five experience and him bringing over half a roster of guys that have played at multiple divisions of football
That was it.
is is a
That was
way
it.
of
That was it.
angling at it. It's just not as extreme as going triple option service
Military
academy.
service academy
Yeah,
style.
yeah,
Um, I'm really impressed at a couple of things. First of all, Mekhi Jackson, PFF loved him last year. You talk about someone that last year at Appalachian State, good offense, 80
yep,
targets, ended up producing 46 catches, 745 yards, 5 touchdowns, a PFF grade in the 70s, which you'll take every day of the week for someone who's on the field quite a
absolutely.
bit. Um, that real vertical threat exists as far as Mekhi Jackson. A dot average depth of target of 17 yards, which exceeds the A dot of Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt. So when you think about, hey, when Kurtis Rourke targeted Surratt and Cooper, a lot of that was deep. A lot of that was down the field. Mekhi Jackson had a longer average depth of target than Surratt and Cooper. So App State's
Yep.
quarterback was pumping the ball down the field to Mekhi Jackson, and it was fairly successful with that PFF grade in the 70s, even though App State's quarterback was actually intercepted 5 times throwing to Mekhi Jackson. So if you eliminate a couple of those, I'm sure the PFF grade gets even bumped up a little bit more
Yeah.
as far as Jackson's concerned. And then with Jonathan Brady, the number that really stands out with Jonathan Brady when you really dig into what could persist at Indiana, what could really help his case in Indiana, contested catch percentage. Brady last year
Mm.
had 16 contested targets from Fernando Mendoza, and Brady caught 10 of those. 10 out of 16 contested. So it's not a 50-50 ball with Jonathan Brady. It's not even a 60-40 ball. It's a 65-35 ball when it comes to Jonathan Brady against a corner in tight space and tight coverage. I love seeing that. That's a percentage higher than Elijah Surratt. That's a percentage higher than Omar Cooper. And Surratt and Cooper, especially Surratt, are excellent at that contested catch rate, that contested catch percentage compared to their college football peers in the Power 5 level at the wide receiver position. So seeing Jonathan Brady put together a contested catch percentage in the 60s, again, it's not a 50-50 ball with Jonathan Brady. It's 65-35 ball. And when I think about how Donovan McCulley was used in Indiana a couple years ago, I wouldn't be surprised if Jonathan Brady became not Indiana's goal line back, but Indiana's goal line receiving curveball changeup to make sure the Hoosiers get touchdowns instead of field goals. I would love to
I
see
like
that
that.
with Fernando Mendoza this upcoming season. Of course, Mendoza and Brady have that connection going back to their time at Cal. We're going to wrap up here talking about the hog mollies, the offensive line, the trenches, the tight end room a little bit as well to wrap up this episode. But real quick, just a social media shout out. In case y'all haven't found us, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. We're at the Hoosier Sound, as well as at Indiana HQ. Matt, on Instagram, we're not Indiana HQ, but what are we?
Indiana dot period HQ.
Exactly. You can find us there. Again, going back to what we talked about earlier, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. That's how we grow the best way possible. We don't have an agenda on here. We don't like to spread misinformation on here. We just like talking football, talking basketball.
We
And
like
so,
talking ball, dog.
that's really all it is at the end of the day. If you want someone who's going to yell and shout and talk about fake stuff, create noise out of nowhere,
I mean, I tend to do that sometimes.
most of the time.
I am banned from going to basketball games in East Lansing because of that. So
It's all right.
no, I didn't. For
Not even
the
that
folks that don't know
interesting.
that joke, I didn't say anything bad. I just said that a certain Michigan State basketball player was going to transfer on Ant's podcast, and as a joke, and Tom Izzo and his staff did not think that was funny. So, anyways, moving on.
Yeah, moving on. Um, most of the time we keep it real. Just talking football, talking basketball. Nothing more to it. So again, spread the love. Help grow the numbers, folks. So Matt, let's really quickly touch on the tight end situation. Indiana last year didn't get too much offensive fantasy stats out of their tight end. Zach Horton was excellent, staying in line, helping protect the passer, helping
Yep.
serve as the occasional security valve. You're getting a little bit more of a catching threat out of Holden Stace, who comes over with a year of eligibility left. Riley Nowakowski from Wisconsin, the connection with Bob Bostad. Nowakowski might emerge as the primary tight end on this offense if they are looking for a blocking specialist to play the tight end role. I don't know which direction Indiana's coaching staff is going to go with the tight end room. I don't know how much the tight end is going to be on the field, honestly. Stace, I said earlier, maybe was a Miami guy. I was wrong. He came over from Tennessee. He was at Notre Dame previously as well. He's got an NFL pass catching body, 6'4, 250, but the production hasn't been there all too much in his collegiate career. Holden Stace is going to be a pretty fascinating story player to track this upcoming season because Curt Cignetti's deal from the jump has been production over potential. This is a potential guy. Curt Cignetti bucked the trend a little bit by adding Holden Stace to his football team this upcoming year, penciling him in potentially as the starter. This is a potential guy, Matt. Do you
Mhm.
think we could see Holden Stace serve as a breakout tight end as a pass catching option in this offense, or do you think we'll see more Riley Nowakowski in line, help block, move the ball down the field?
I really think we're gonna see more Nowakowski.
Me too.
I think Stays again is one of those guys you can plug and play as a weapon. You need somebody in a close game. The receivers aren't getting as open as you would like them to.
I can see that.
Maybe their linebackers are weak in coverage of the team that we're playing.
Right.
Let's plug in
A
Stays, right? Let's
matchup
get a
advantage.
let's give them a matchup. Let's give them some more numbers to think about, right? Maybe their defensive line isn't our offensive line is holding up against their defensive line. Okay, let's get a guy in there that kind of chip, one of the D ends, and then kind of go
Right.
out in the flat, give Mendoza a 5 yard option, right? In the flat there.
Yep.
So he's somebody I think that brings that. I think Nowakowski or wait, is
Yep.
Nowakowski?
Yep.
Yeah, Nowakowski. He brings what exactly made IU's offense last year with Zach Horton so potent, which is that he is an extra offensive lineman and a guy that can come in and do that dirty work that gets the running backs into space and that makes the RPO so successful and what makes teams have to respect on every single play that Indiana could do 5 different things, right? One of them just happens to be not throw it to the tight end, even though, again, he is a guy that could end up doing that, right? But mostly they have to think about, is the running back getting the ball? No. Okay. Is the quarterback running? Yes or no? No. Okay. Which 3 wide receivers is it going to? Okay. Now we have to get through an extra offensive lineman to get there, plus a running back. Oh, they're throwing it to the running back? That's 5, right? Like, there's so many different things the defense has to think about all at one time with this offense when you add in an extra blocker. If you don't have that extra blocker, it is an extra thing to think about, but it's only amongst the other wide receivers,
Right.
right? You're doing a very similar thing. But having the 6 blocker impedes the pass rush for an offense and a quarterback that's going to need some time to throw back there. So I genuinely think that Nowakowski's going to get more looks than Stays, but I think they're going to end up throwing it to the tight end more this year because you have a tight end on the roster that's a much better pass catching tight end.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's so fascinating to me that Cignetti went the potential route here. This is his like, I don't know if this is the right analogy, but this is kind of the raffle ticket that Cignetti's using now that he's a Power 5 coach in a Power 2 conference where, unlike his time at JMU, he had a chance here to go get a guy with that 4 5-star high school recruit profile that played at Notre Dame and Tennessee.
Yep.
This
Yep.
is
This is his Khalil Ware.
Yeah, this
That's
is
what this is.
exactly. That's a great analogy. This is Cignetti saying, "Hey, screw all of you. Like my team made the CFP last year. I have recruiting momentum at Indiana. We're in the Big Ten, which is one of the 2 primary conferences in the sport. Let me go get a guy who could be Kyle Pitts for all I know." Hit the, you
Exactly.
know.
The ceiling for this kid, the raw potential is so high.
And look,
But
Stays
again,
last year.
he just hasn't put it all together
Nope,
inconsistently.
at all. It's not there. That production is non-existent. It is not real. It is fake.
Yeah.
You know? And so Stace, by the way, who played most of his snaps last year in the slot at Tennessee, something to think about. Stace did not drop a pass all season. I know that's something that's going to catch Cignetti's eye. 16 targets, 0 drops. You'll take that every day of the week. 16 targets, 15 receptions at Tennessee. Okay, you'll like that. The vast majority of Stace's collegiate production over the last 2 seasons with the Volunteers took place against NC State. For some reason, against NC State, he murdered the Wolfpack. Like they had no answer for him. They played each other in 23, they played each other in 24, and Holden State had an unbelievable, game in both of those matchups. So that's funny to see. And then, yeah, you talked about Nowakowski's blocking upside. 77 pass block grade last year at Wisconsin per PFF. Just
What
a
was his run
guy,
block grade?
just a guy who I'm pulling that up here, but just a guy who went out there and it's funny, right? Like for years, I was thinking of Wisconsin as sort of the premier protection program in college football. A
Yeah.
program that just blocked and they blocked so well and they blocked their way to like BCS bowl appearances, New Year's Six bowl appearances. And all of
Yep.
a sudden, if you would have told the undergrad me 2010, 2011, 2012, as I watched Wisconsin beat Indiana 83-20, that Indiana would be taking over blocking specialists from the Badgers to play for Bob Bostad, who used to coach at Wisconsin, I'd be like, this is nuts. So in his career, Nowakowski has shown proficiency both in pass blocking and run blocking, but last year, 77 pass block, 57 run block. Previous year, 64 pass block, 64 run block. So like it's a little bit
Okay.
all over the map. But you
Okay.
can see the type of mold that Bob Bostad is going after.
But also the run blocking is not necessarily on him because that can also be they have bad running backs and a bad running scheme, and then he's just getting blamed for having bad run blocking because his team sucks. And Wisconsin did in fact suck last year. So
I mean, to their defense, of course, a couple years ago, Braylon Allen, of course, now Braylon Allen is in the NFL. Last year, Tawi Walker, solid running back. I think now he's at an SEC school somewhere. But in
yeah,
general, you know,
Wisconsin was kind of bad last year. So
Wisconsin ain't it. They used to
we've
be it.
become Wisconsin.
That's deep. Because the thing is, Wisconsin used to throw the ball too, right? With Russell Wilson and with several of the other quarterbacks that they had across the 2000s and the 2010s. They had
Look,
those explosive threat.
the parallels are there. You have a
Jared Abbrederis.
you have a head coach that is a larger than life character. For Wisconsin, that guy was literally too large. But
He's cooking though at Illinois. Beals is cooking. Having a little bit of a technical glitch here, but yeah, Bielema was so good when it came to his time with the Badgers. Barry Alvarez was the same as well. And then, as Matt, I'm sure, was saying, like, the Badgers have kind of lost their mojo. Man, like, it's so weird to think Indiana. Is Indiana the next Wisconsin? I don't know. Wow. I could kind of see it though. We're still working through some technical stuff here. It looks like Matt maybe
I'm back.
disappeared. Oh, mission accomplished. Real quick, just wrap up your thought on Wisconsin. We'll dive into this IU offensive line.
I don't know how much you heard, but basically my synopsis was not only was our coach a larger than life
Yeah,
character, in Wisconsin case, he was just very large. But also both schools have a red lettered logo,
true.
and both pride
Important.
themselves on running the football and blocking, and both are historically mid to bad college football programs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy to think
Like
about, but
historic,
true.
like historically, was hasn't Wisconsin just been in the basement of the Big Ten, and then in the 80s and 90s, was it Bo Allen or whoever it was came
Right.
in and kind of pulled them out of there, right?
Yeah, you had Barry
So
Alvarez who like
Barry
really
Alvarez, sorry,
turned the corner. Bo Ryan was the
um,
basketball coach. Yeah, but yeah,
Bo
like
Ryan was Barry Alvarez.
it's all
Yeah,
good. And then this offensive line, right, Matt? Like, honestly, we could have just done this entire episode on IU's offensive line. Curt Cignetti goes out there, retains Carter Smith and Bray Lynch. Music to my ears. If you had told me that's all that happened during portal season, I would have been like, it's a victory. It's a victory
Yep.
in itself.
Those guys could have gone to an SEC school immediately and made probably a significant amount more in NIL than what they were making at IU. Yeah.
Well, and Bray Lynch too, especially, he comes over from the state of Texas. That's where he grew up, protecting Cade Klubnik in high school. Now Cade Klubnik in the running for the number one overall pick in the 26 NFL draft. Could be Arch Manning if that happens. Klubnik top five, pretty easily. I
Yeah.
was, Bray Lynch was Klubnik's left tackle in high school. And Lynch again from Texas could have probably gone to Texas or Oklahoma or Clemson. And, so many different options I'm sure were presented to him. He's back with the Hoosiers. Carter Smith, Midwest boy, but um, he is one of the special left tackles in the sport. He's going to be back next year for Indiana. Pat Coogan comes over from Notre Dame. He's going to start as Indiana's center, taking over from Mike Caddick, who moved on. You also have Drew Evans. He's back this season. Zen Mahalski from Ohio State, right tackle there. Khalil Benson is on this two deep. We'll see if he starts. We'll see if he's the break glass in case of emergency option in case someone goes down. Benson has spent time at guard. He spent time at tackle. That kind of
Yep.
versatility is so important. Matt, let's face it, the offensive line is the bread and butter of this team. Curt Cignetti's talked about trenches more than any other IU football coach has combined. I love seeing that. I love hearing that. This offensive line has potential, I think, to be the best in program history. What do you look at as far as this offensive line is concerned?
I mean, on paper, they are the best offensive
Yep,
line I think this program has ever
I agree.
had.
And there have
Like
been some good
from
ones.
one, yeah, there's been some decent ones, but from one, especially in the Kevin Wilson era, there's some actually good ones. But from 1 to 5, the level of talent, the level of productivity,
So
the
special.
level of experience, this is a potential national championship contending offensive line.
Yep,
This is what those schools like Michigan have
exactly.
every year. This is what these schools like Ohio State have every year. They have 5 guys on the offensive line that, most of
Joe
them
Moore
played
Award
together.
contender.
Joe Moore Award contenders. They got, a center that's coming over from another program who's very promising. Just there's meat and muscle and pedigree on the offensive line, and that's what Indiana has in this
You
with
want
this
to
offensive
talk
line.
about the NIL era a little bit, Matt? Because here's what's interesting, right? If you look at the Joe Moore Award winners for the best offensive lines in college football from a unit standpoint, for years it was Alabama, Iowa, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, LSU, Alabama, Michigan, Michigan. And then the last 2 years, it was Washington and Army, which like you wouldn't necessarily equate to like offensive line powerhouses, but it goes to show, right? Like Washington built the program with an idea, mindset, correct approach. I don't know how much of it has to do with NIL, but just like the right mindset, the right approach, the right process at Washington. You don't have to tell me about Army's process, right? Like last year to crack into the top 25 with their team, they were so solid. They were so fundamentally sound from the first game of the season. It looks like
Yep,
that's the direction Indiana's going to with Bob Bostad.
I agree. Well, I will say about the NIL stuff. I think it's pulling offensive linemen, young offensive linemen, away from the big teams because you're not playing. And when you're not playing, you're not making money. And if you're not making money, you're wasting your 4 years of eligibility or 5 or 6 or whatever we're getting to at this point, years of eligibility in the NCAA. So it's spreading the talent around more. I mean, Alabama would win every year, or Michigan would win every year because their offensive line was 10 deep, right?
Yeah. And like
And the guys
guys
would
were
sticking it around.
exactly.
We're sticking around.
Like, well, I'll get my shot senior year.
Exactly. Well,
That was the
that's what I will
mindset.
say about this IU offensive line. Uh, they're great at the
Yeah.
top.
Amazing.
But my God, am I scared once you get past Khalil Benson? Once you get past Khalil Benson, it's a lot of young players. Now, albeit most of those guys are Cignetti guys, right? And so I trust Sig and I trust, and they're Bostad guys. I trust that they know what they're doing. But for the most part, you want your quarterback to be experienced.
Yeah.
But the second position you want to have experience on is the offensive line. And some people would argue it's actually easier to replace a quarterback, especially at this level of college football, than it is to replace a excellent offensive lineman,
Especially a
right?
center.
And a center, right? And so again, when you're looking at this roster and you're looking at a weakness on offense, the one weakness I'm looking at is depth on the offensive line. And for a program that throughout its history has really been hampered by tons of really stupid injuries, it scares me. Okay. But
Nick
we're
Kidwell just a
Indiana.
year ago, right? Think about that, right?
Exactly.
Nick
Exactly.
Kidwell went down.
I yeah, and he was supposed to be a starter, right? He was a shoe-in starter
Shooing,
for this,
shooing. Yep.
yeah, for this team last year. So again, I'm just waiting with bated breath to see what the actual lineup or what the actual group looks like
Yep.
for that first game. But if it is the lineup and it is the group that what we think will be on paper, I'm extremely excited for this group.
Yeah, me
But
too.
they gotta
And
stay healthy. They just gotta stay healthy. Just gotta stay healthy. That's it. That's it. I mean, you can say that about every position in football, and I understand that. But especially this offensive line unit, because again, I don't trust a freshman, no matter who trusts them. I don't trust a freshman coming in and being able to do 70% or even 50% of what any of these starter guys can do together. Like it's gonna throw off chemistry. It's just not gonna be a good thing.
it won't. And the crazy part about all of this is that earlier in this podcast episode we talked about how Fernando Mendoza's biggest weakness is what happens when he's under pressure. There is a bit of a chaos element as far as Mendoza, getting a little bit scrambled, throwing the ball to the other team. The decision making is a little bit helter-skelter. He was also a young quarterback, 2 years behind an offensive line at Cal that didn't do him any favors. And,
No.
you know, to what extent are we talking about? Like Indiana last year had five offensive linemen, five or six offensive linemen that played consistently throughout the year. Cal had three linemen giving up more pressures than Trey Wettig. And Trey Wettig gave up the most pressures among all Indiana offensive linemen. And Trey Wettig's a baller.
Yep.
Like Trey Wettig could easily,
Yeah.
be playing on NFL Sunday soon enough. Cal had three offensive linemen last year concede more pressures than the Indiana offensive linemen that conceded the most pressures. That's an alarming sign for the offensive line that Cal had last season. And it's a warning sign for how Curt Cignetti needs to help his quarterback succeed to the best extent possible. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this offensive line develops as a whole. The good news is somebody like Pat Coogan, the center position, barely gave up any pressures last year from the interior for Notre Dame. Coogan over 800 snaps at Notre Dame last year, just eight pressures conceded. That's a really comforting sign for someone who's going to take over as your starting center. For comparison, Mike Caddick played about the same number of snaps, gave up a couple more pressures. So, from a statistical profile standpoint, Caddick and Coogan right about the same. If Pat Coogan can have a year like Mike Caddick had last year at the center position, Fernando Mendoza is going to sleep comfortably at night, knowing what his game days will be like on a week to week basis. I'm looking forward to seeing that, Khalil Benson development, Drew Evans and Mahalski, who steps up there, who is the reserve offensive lineman that Indiana relies on in case of injury. All of that is something I'll be tracking as as preseason practices get underway in August or so. So that should be fun to keep an eye on over the course of the next several weeks, leading up to the first three games of the season, which, as we mentioned, give Indiana a little bit of an opportunity to experiment a little bit before that Illinois game in week 4. So overall, I'm very optimistic about this offense. I don't know if Indiana will be second in the country in points per game like they were last year, but as Matt and I discussed, I think the theme of this offense is keeping the defense off balance, having a lot of freedom, having a lot of different choices, having a lot of different points of attack compared to what they had a year ago. Mendoza, probably not the surgeon like precision of Kurtis Rourke, but has a little bit more of that explosive, big play, hard on his sleeve type of style that Indiana didn't quite have last season, in addition to a couple of healthy knees, unlike Indiana's spectacular QB1 Kurtis Rourke last year. As we wind down here on this Friday, Matt, any final thoughts on the IU offense? Anything else on your mind as we close things down on this Friday?
Uh, Not really, to be honest. I mean, NBA Finals were kind of a bummer the way it ended. We were talking about that
Yeah,
last week. I
right.
mean, it
Very sad.
just yeah,
Very
just
sad.
very anticlimactic. Obviously, to all my Pacer fans, I'm sorry. I was
Yeah.
rooting for you guys,
Same,
seriously.
same, same, same.
Um, yeah, I mean, the offense is gonna be better, I think. Yeah, obviously not. I don't think statistically wise because you're playing harder games, but I think overall they're going to be tougher to play against. And I'm very excited to see Mendoza in a uniform. That's about it.
Me too. I would not be surprised if Fernando Mendoza, who has 2 years of eligibility remaining, is in the mix to become Indiana's first round NFL draft pick in decades. I don't think
Yeah,
Indiana's had
Anthony Thompson's.
a first round pick since 2000. I think
Yeah,
2000 was the last one. Um, which is crazy to think about. 1994, Thomas Lewis,
shout out Thomas Lewis.
which is insane. Just like absolutely insane to think about. Um, I believe SMU is the other Power Five school that has a drought as long as that. And SMU
That's
was not
weird.
Power Five for several years. So
Even
that's
still,
just,
it's SMU, Texas
yeah,
football. It grows NFL players, so that's weird.
exactly, exactly. No, very fair point. I would not be surprised if Mendoza's in the running, but I also wouldn't be surprised if you saw someone else, maybe like Aiden Fisher, maybe Mikhail Kamara. I wouldn't be surprised if a
No,
couple of
it's
guys,
it's it's no 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 no.
Pons,
It's Pawns.
Pons.
If we're gonna be serious, it's Pawns.
I hear you. I'm not disputing that one bit. 4 first round Hoosiers. How's that sound?
They
5
make the
Surratt.
college football. Hey, look, they make the college football players this year, and they win multiple games.
I think Surratt.
That's I Surratt will certainly be on the radar.
Big season.
Kamara will certainly be on the radar. I don't think Fisher will be, but I think Fisher would be like a top 3 or 4 round pick, like a third or a fourth rounder, right? There's a lot of guys that if the team performs at a level that people aren't expecting them to this year, could really reap the benefits of.
That would be super exciting. I can't wait to see the rest of this offseason play out. We're going to dive into the defense in our next episode, but that about wraps it up for our 347th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you heard today, be sure to follow us at Indiana HQ to make sure you don't miss out. We can also go to our website, indianahq.com, to find it all in one place. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we will see you next time.
Peace and love, go Hoosiers.